What is up? What is up? What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Pioneer Podcast. I am your host, Kai Davis, and today I am here with the wonderful, everlasting Michael Farrell. What's going on?
Not too much, man. It's been a nice morning, not too cold right now.
Yeah,
Digging it.
Man, I'm not gonna lie, I'm really thankful to have this nice weather too. But just to jump right in, man, what are we here to talk about today?
Oh, today we are here to talk about the history of Oklahoma, and more specifically, the native history of Oklahoma. So when we, at the beginning, we'll be talking about the pre-colonial times, and that'll be just completely native since, no one, the Europeans hadn't come here yet. So we'll be getting into sort of how they got here, some theories and proven theories, I guess, about that, and the various tribes that are here, and the now and future.
Okay, good. I was about to say, honestly, I got to give you props on being really heavy on Native American culture. Because I noticed, with the articles that you write and the work that you put in, even the artifacts that you collect, you really put a lot of time into identifying Native American culture and finding recognition within history that wasn't even recorded at the time. I think that's really dope that you do that.
Thank you. I would say it definitely means a lot to me because, I believe myself to be a proud American, I guess you could say. And I really feel, the only way for us to be able to have any kind of peace, is to live in peace with the people that are already here. And that's through understanding. I really believe that's how we do that. And that's why I always look into things like this, to get that understanding. So whenever I am face to face, there's a lot less animosity because I understand them. How they live, how they see the world, all that.
Mm-hmm. That's real, man. That's real.
Thank you.
All right, now I want you to take us back to pre-Spanish Oklahoma. Let's say the Mississippian era, 800, 1600 AD. Now, what tribes were thriving at this time?
At this time, there were various different tribes. And there were Caddos, Comanches, there were Kiowas, Tonkawas. Tonkawas have been around for a while. And Caddos actually have had artifacts found as late as 900 BC. So they go back a long time. And at that time, Caddos were more agriculturalists. So, they were more farming and into, how should I say? No, here, to be able to really make sense of it, you gotta know they had a very spiritual way of looking at things, and that spiritual aspect was very animistic. So, they really believed that the water, the air, the land, so to speak, is what gave birth to them. And in essence, it kind of does, since it's where we all come from, So that is another very important thing about people in this time is, they didn't have the technology, so they were very spiritual, and that was how they looked at things. It wasn't how Christianity is. There's one God, and then just kind of it, really, the one God. There was a lot of animisms, really. They look at the elements, they'll worship those, but not really. It can be hard to explain because, when I say this, a lot of people want to look at it in a mystical way, but they'll be worshiping the rain, not so much because they think, Poseidon's about to come down, some god or something, but because the rain gives literally life to them. You know what I'm saying? So they would worship that aspect of it. So in this time, you'll want to look at that spiritual beliefs as mystical, but you got to keep in mind what they were worshiping was real. The rain, wind, all that. The elements, really. It's very real.
I was saying, I know all those elements carry some sort of symbolism, not even just back then, but today as well. They do, the different forms of weather,
and
especially
animals.
Mm-hmm, and the animals too.
Dude, actually, the animals, they are real big on there'll be whole tribes named after animals, and these animals, can represent different things, like, say, a bird could represent, agility,
mm-hmm.
being able to be more agile, really. They'll be able to adapt to different situations. And then say the bear, excuse me, the bear clan. That would represent a clan that's probably more warlike, because while Caddos were more agriculturalist, there were other groups such as Comanches and Tonkawas. They were much more warlike. So, in that warfare of that time was more guerrilla type warfare. Like, a good comparison I could make is how the Norse would be. They were really known for like raiding the English. They eventually had a king, but for a long time it was tribes and groups, and that's what all these were. They had Caddos and Tonkawas, but they would break off into different clans. Bear clan, eagle clan, rain clan, something like that. Maybe not those, but something of that nature. So and when you hear those names, always keep in mind it's not like they think they're about to transform. It's hard to describe. I see, describing these spiritual beliefs from this time can be a little difficult, because I want to say a few things, but I don't want people thinking the wrong thing.
You don't want to misconstrue what the actual ideology is.
Yeah, because there was something I heard from maybe from a Navajo man. Wally was his name. Navajos aren't from Oklahoma, but something he did say is that he was speaking on Native American culture as a whole, and that it's mystical, as people think. And in this time, back then, when you think of this time period and their spiritual beliefs, people will, want to think, they were worshiping the sun god or something. But no, like literally the sun gives them life. If we had no sun, there'd be no earth. So when they say, the life giver, they mean it honestly, literally. Sun gives us life. Rain gives us food, things like that. But this is all, kind of spiritual and all that sort of, what's the word? Feel good, I guess you could say. But there was definitely warfare at that time. And that was what Apaches were real known for. And, they would tell you that guerrilla type of warfare that I mentioned with the Norse, where they would really raid so much. Not is, you'd think of the European style warfare, which is just massive armies of like thousands, tens of thousands potentially. But here, that would happen sometimes, but what was way more common was just raiding like a local village, a local town. Well, I guess not so much towns. Their towns were a little different, such as the Spyro Mound Builders. That was Caddo. Those were some of the more what's the word? Organized civilization. What's the word? Not civilizations. Towns. Yeah, we'll go ahead and call it down. Most civilized towns for the sake of talking. But at that time, they would probably have raided. They wouldn't have really gone to war in the Eastern or Western sense. And what I just said right there, Eastern and Western, brings up a good thing. You got to keep in mind, when you say Western, this is the West. When you say Western, you think of European, but Europe and what we call the Americas is very different, because so many things I can go into on this time period. Because another thing too is this was called Turtle Island previously, then if you were to translate it into English, because America comes from Amerigo Vespucci. That's a Spanish explorer.
Well, you said America what?
Amerigo Vespucci. That's where the name America comes from. It's a Spanish word.
Huh.
And but it was originally called Turtle Island in that time, since we're on pre-colonial times. And they had a very democratic way of looking at things. So everything was really Confederacy. You had Caddos, Tonkawas, Apaches, Kiowas, and dozens others. Honestly, you could go on. There's a whole list of names you could go on about. But you had those, but they break off into those confederacies. So that would be their, they had their spiritual aspect, but that would be their political system. It was very democratic, actually. And it was always, of course, to prevent war, which would happen, of course. Humans, get low on resources, they get desperate, so it would happen. And some of that warfare would be pretty brutal, scalping and all that. That's from here, that's not European. And So, another thing that sort of led to that, the reason they would fight like that is a lot of them were nomadic. So, when you're nomadic, you can't build up resources, some of the Katos were able to do with like Spyro mounds, the mound builders. They're in one place, so they can just like save up everything. They're not constantly moving around, having to pack things up and throw things away. So tribes like Comanches were very nomadic. But we'll get a little bit more into Comanches when the Spanish showed up, because prior to this, they weren't as nomadic. They definitely were, but they weren't as nomadic because they didn't have horses. Horses weren't, they weren't native to the Americas at this time. So they would they'd have to walk everywhere, or I don't know, find some other smaller beast of burden to carry things.
I was about to say, and at this time there weren't a lot of livestock. There wasn't a lot of livestock, was there?
No, there was definitely there was, man, some tribes were definitely, what's the word? What is the word for I guess ranching, I guess. I can't remember the technical term, but some tribes would, not many. A lot of tribes would grow vegetables such like the Three Sisters, beans, corns, and squash, and then they'd hunt. And that's how, hunting's largely how they got their meat and whatnot. Because there were some, but definitely buffalo, of course, the obvious one. But they weren't so much as, because they kind of, worshipped that animal because it's what fed them. So they wouldn't really, corral them, I guess, and take care of them in the sense that we know of today. They would just know they're in this area, so we'll just stay around here and then follow them. How these nomadic tribes would live largely followed where buffalo went. Wherever buffalo went, the food went, they went.
Mm-hmm.
And if they came across another tribe and they had something they wanted and they weren't willing to trade, they just take it. Something that was really valuable was copper. That was worth a lot.
I could see copper being worth a lot during that time.
Yeah, anytime you can get your hand on some kind of metal, that was a lot. But you saw here in Oklahoma, here in Oklahoma at this time, what we now call Oklahoma, that stuff was worth a lot because, as you see, this isn't a mountainous area, so there's not a lot of readily available metals that you could easily mine. So if you want to mine here in Oklahoma, you need modern equipment.
Right.
So even at this time, there was still a lot of tribes using stone tools and stone arrows, stone axes, all that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a lot of that didn't really show up until the Spanish got here. And once they saw what the Spanish had, they definitely took that, which is a whole other thing.
So the Great Plains.
Yeah, and now the thing about this time period is the history can be kind of here and there, which is why I kind of stutter a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I got to think of what some things might be oral history, some things might actually be written down, some things are physical artifacts. And then at the end of the day, when talking about native tribes, always keep in mind each tribe was different. So, you can go to one tribe and they'll be all peaceful and horticulturalists and, building giant mounds. And you said you brought up Mississippian period. There was a lot of people in that time in that area, which was a little outside of Oklahoma, but they eventually came here. We'll get there. But at that time, that area was actually pretty fucking civilized.
Oops. Bleep that.
Excuse my language. Was actually pretty civilized, and they had a lot more. Yeah, like that mounds kind of building. Mound buildings. Kados had these giant grass houses. They weren't necessarily teepees. Like teepees were specific to specific tribes. What Kados generally had would just giant grass houses that could hold about 10 to 12 people. So you'd see a lot of that in mounds. The mound builders they were big here. A lot of people know about that. That's definitely an interesting spot because, it was so far back, but given everything going on around them, they were still organized. and it was that organization for that time period. That's always interesting to see.
Okay. I'll say
And
another.
on one more quick note, some of those mounds are still around in eastern Oklahoma, so you can go see them. They're
Nice.
very cool.
That's dope. You know the name of them?
Spyro mounds.
Spyro Mountains. Okay, cool.
Spyro.
Cool. That's what's up. That's what's up. I know that you mentioned some of the tribes like they broke apart into like separate clans. Do you happen to know if any of the clans or any of the tribes had like come together at all, like to live like a combined lifestyle?
Now, I wouldn't say these clans so much as they didn't really break up. Well, I try to describe it. Because they're still together, definitely. It was just as you know, as colonialism came here, those tribes started to become more packed together, and then that was when they started seeing more what's the word, unity, I guess, more treaties between the tribes, such as Cheyenne or Arapaho, I believe. I'm pretty sure they're one of the tribes that they are not native to here, but when they were forced here, so those are two different clans that had to come together. Because a lot of them are still around. Just a lot of them, I would say, are kind of spread out at this point, but we'll get to there later.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right. Now, what would you say was basically like at this time before the Spanish had arrived? What would you say was the relevance of these tribes existing?
I would say their relevance was it showed that I would really say that because remember before I had mentioned how Americans and these different tribes could sort of get along, and I would say their idea of democracy is largely well, actually, no, I'd say our idea of democracy is largely based off what they had going on. So the more I would say we learn about how they organize their democracies, I think we can learn a lot from that, since that's really the root of democracy, really, with the exception of Greece. But whole nother thing.
Right. And speaking of democracy, like democracy that we would have into today, let's fast forward into modern Oklahoma, like let's say 1800 to now, basically. How would you say, were there any new tribes that came through, or were there any tribes that still
Nope.
existed during this time?
I would say the issue isn't any new tribes, but at this time it's the lack of tribes. Because at this time, 1800, genocide was already well underway, so a lot of tribes just didn't exist. There was also smallpox, which took out a lot. To see genocide, uh, like a purposeful genocide, and then fighting and assimilation. Those things definitely took a huge toll, but disease is something that wiped out a lot of tribes. So by 1800, there was a lot of people by accident and on purpose that were given smallpox, and they didn't have any immunity to it since smallpox isn't native to this place, and that's a European disease. So when they brought that here, that wiped out a lot of tribes. So at this time, it's actually kind of the opposite. Not any new tribes, but I would really say lack thereof.
Okay.
And then it's hard to give a name because it's better to just say dozens of tribes were just kind of wiped out. And at this point, since you mentioned to now, I'd say it's really the larger, more powerful tribes that at that time still exist. Like how those were around at that time, and they're still around today. And is there something else you want to ask?
I was just gonna ask if you could elaborate on the tribes that were still kind of relevant, like existing at this time.
Oh, okay. And so at this time, there started being a lot more forced migration. It by 1800s we're getting not at the Trail of Tears, but we're getting there. We're getting closer. So there's already forced migration going on. You're already hearing what's his name, Thomas Jefferson going on about wanting to move more natives, not even just a lot of people. So you started seeing groups like Seminole, which isn't from here. But if you live in Oklahoma, you probably heard of them, but they're not from here. Seminole, there's something else I had written down. There's Seminole, Cherokees, and they started being migrated here. So in the context of Oklahoma, you started having new tribes being forcefully migrated here. So, you had Caddos, Wichitas, Comanches, Apaches, Tonkawas. They were native. But at this time, 1800s, up to, I'd say about 1900, is when that was the time of forced migration. So you started seeing way more tribes in Oklahoma. It started getting packed. At first, when you look at a map of Oklahoma at this time, in 1800, you'll see the native tribes that they have there and the borders that are federally recognized because they were writing treaties for, letting, the way they convinced these natives to move here was through these treaties, telling them, if you move here, we'll give you, so-and-so access to so-and-so amount of land, and you'll get to govern yourselves. And that's how they convinced a lot of them to move there. But, of course, it was kind of BS since they started going back on a lot of it. Because you look at a map at 1800s, of the 1800s, early 1800s, you'll see, not too many tribes. And it looks, spaced out, like they can live comfortably. But as time goes on, you start seeing new tribes being brought in, forced in. And so space just gets smaller and smaller. And by the nature of that, you do start seeing some intertribal warfare for sure. And it was nothing on maybe warfare is not the right word. Intertribal conflicts, I guess you could say. Yeah, because it's not like it was open war or anything. But, just the nature of everyone being forced into one place and really not having much money is the reality of it. And so that would happen. And, here in Oklahoma in that time, a lot of new tribes that were forced here. And then, God, dozens. And when I say a lot, I mean dozens. If you look at a map of native tribes pre-colonialism and then look at it now, most are compressed into Oklahoma. You'll see other reservations, other places like Navajo and Eastern Cherokees and all them, and in the north, but a lot are crammed here.
I'll say I know Oklahoma is pretty heavy whenever it comes to the Native American culture. Then again, we're pretty diverse as is, but
I think we have the largest native population, actually, if not the second. I want to say it's first or second. It's up there.
I still think that's crazy, and especially since the fact that it's it wasn't even necessarily their original decision to live here, but the fact that they were forced to live here, it's damning in a way, honestly.
Yeah, I would say it brings up the question. Excuse me, man, that cough. Whoa.
Man, it gets you.
Yeah, it does. It does get me.
Yeah.
But
how has
say what?
Did you have something else?
Oh, I was just gonna say, and no, they had those treaties, and it was the Dawes Act and things like Curtis Act of 1867. I think Curtis Act 1867 and Dawes Act that led to a lot of natives losing their land because that's where Sooner came in, sort of, but those people that ended up becoming called Sooners, they ended up taking a lot of native land. Or the unassigned lands, I guess it was called, but we all know whose it was. It was not unassigned.
Boomer Sooner. All right. All right. Besides that, though, how would you say aside from the forced migration, them being forced to live in new land with them having to be forced to live in a new land that they are having to readjust to, how has their lifestyle changed?
That's a good question. That is an excellent question. I would say, are you talking about in a modern day, in 2024 even? All the way up?
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, okay. I was about to say, throughout the years.
Their culture's changed a lot because, for example, we were at 1800s, so now we can get up to about 1900s. About early 1900s, there's a huge issue of boarding schools. And, that was pretty much forced assimilation. If you want to believe in God, go for it, of course, freedom of of religion, all that, but they were not. They were forced, and these kids were really abused in these boarding schools, and so that changed their culture. Again in a big way, but very sadly forced it onto them. So a lot of them ended up becoming, like the white man, you could say, believing it being very Christian. And by Christian, very evangelical, to be more specific, very Protestant view of it, very Puritan view of Christianity is what they had forced onto them. So a lot of them started becoming more Christians. In early 1900s, you actually start seeing their language starting to die. A lot more of them are starting to speak English. And even today, there would be a lot of them who, a lot of like younger natives, they won't know their native language. And, that I would say is one of the biggest changes to their culture. But again, it was kind of forced onto them. But then, of course, that's a bad thing. And then there are some other things where their cultures changed. And I would say a lot of that has to do with modern technology. They're able to, what's the word? A good example I can give of their culture and how it's sort of changed would be like they really like telling these stories and all that. And we have the internet now, so now they're able to take these stories and push them onto people who otherwise may have never heard it. And I would say that's a good way their culture's changed. And then of course, another way their culture's changed is prior, a lot of them were either nomadic, but now at this point they're pretty much all sedentary. That nomadic lifestyle is long gone. So I'd say that is a huge change to their culture. Since we were talking about pre-colonial times, and then now that nomadic lifestyle being just long gone is a big difference. And then a lot more Christian. You see a lot more of that now. There's a lot more Christian. A lot more speak English now. Way more speak English. And, it's not always by force, even though it's definitely important to mention that. There are definitely some people, at this point, I would honestly say the people doing it by choice have really only been able to do that, for probably the last 30, 40 years. Because up until, I want to say, the 50s, they weren't able, a lot of tribes, if not all of them, I want to say, they weren't able to, practice their original religions. So a change, this is actually a very recent change within like the last few years even, is you're starting to see a lot more people, recognize that culture was forced to be taken from, and they're trying to bring it back. So, it's real interesting because it's like a change, but changing back to like the old ways, if that makes sense. Like, because they haven't been living like that for so long, and now it seems like there are a lot more trying to do that, and all the way up to now there's a real push to try and bring those languages back. And that's a sad change, I guess you could say, that they've had to change from another a foreign language back to their language, but a change that's important to bring up, and actually gives me hope, really. Because I'd say the future of Oklahoma is looking interesting, and also because there was the McGirt. Have you heard of McGirt v. Oklahoma?
It sounds very familiar, but then again, I need a GPS everywhere I go here, so
it was a court case that was
oh, my bad.
No, you said GP. I just realized that you said GP.
Yeah,
No, it's not a place.
My
It's
bad.
not a place. It's a court
My
case.
bad. I thought you were talking
It
about. I thought
was,
you were talking about location.
It was a court case that recognized a few different treaties with I can't remember names, but there are Eastern Oklahomans Oklahoman natives that were able to get about their land back if these treaties to be recognized, and it gave Oklahoma about a third of its land to the natives. So now it's bringing up an interesting question of where do we go from here? Now that that's a huge change, is that they've given some of that land back, but now it's at this point, how do we regulate their laws and enforce and all that? The change is a lot of changes, language changes, cultural changes, cultural changes really encompasses all that, like language, language, how they dress, how they move, how they get around. At one point, they were nomadic people giving smoke signals to the rain in the sky, but now they're driving around in Fords, listening to gospel music. it's and then, but then at the same time, you can also go on YouTube and find some people who they're dressed up in the full garb and face paint. So
Hmm.
it's in a real interesting place right now because it could really go one or two ways.
I was saying even in the community, in various communities like here at OCCC, or shoot, even within other people's families, people still celebrate. I've noticed people still celebrate like Native American culture to this day. Like they have their dances, they have their songs. I think some families, I feel like I've heard like some families still talk in their native language as well.
Oh
And the
yeah.
fact that they're going from these oral stories, like of stories that like weren't even recorded, like how American history was recorded. It's
No,
like
glad you
now as
caught
a
that. Good move.
it's like now it's like now at this point in time, since the internet is such a big thing, it's like the carbon footprint is going to be more important than anything.
Yeah.
So it's like even if anyone really wanted to like keep the oral stories alive, they could, but at some point I feel like we're all going to have to abide by, I'm going to just consider it slick assimilation, because I don't feel like it's intentional, because I don't think it's what we really want to do, but it's what we're going to have to do at some point, because it's there's some form of reliance whenever it comes to the internet at this point in time. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. But I'm glad you mentioned the oral thing, is because a lot of these stories haven't been written down. So being able to get them on the internet, it's freaking pretty cool, I think.
Hmm.
Because it's getting down its history, man, and being recorded for all to watch.
Hmm. But I would say it makes it easier to access too, for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But since we're speaking on the future of natives in Oklahoma, aside from everyone kind of adjusting to today's new world where we're driving cars, listening to various forms of music, kind of interpreting life in our own forms, how do you see native culture improving over time?
No, the precedent that was set from McGirt v. Oklahoma, I think, is something that could really, excuse me, could really help natives in Oklahoma, because precedent is important in law and courts and all that legal systems, and that set the precedent that these treaties are still, they're still, the U.S. is still legally bound to these treaties. So now it brings up the question of, if these natives were able to get back their land, how many others could? And that's a good question, because that's a lot of tribes, bro.
Yeah.
And then it also brings up the question of, since I'm not, like, for example, I'm not a member of any of these tribes. The native in me comes from Puerto Rico, which is way off. So I'm a citizen of Oklahoma. So it brings up the question of, if I'm in native land, how do what all can I do? You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
what laws are enforced? What laws do I have to follow? Like, let's say, some native reservations are dry, but I'm not a member of native reservations. So does that mean I could just roll up with a 40 ounce and just start chugging it? Probably not. Maybe. That brings up a good question. Common sense, of course, will tell you no. Morality will tell you no. But of
Hmm.
course, how humans can be. Some people may just be like, oh, it doesn't matter. I'm not a member of it.
It's
But
like we
then
just
that's
go
where
ahead and do it
enforcement
anyway.
comes in. Because if you got to enforce this law, if it was committed on, like, I can get so complicated, because, like, Oklahoma citizen on native land commits a crime on native land, is it the native tribes that enforce it, or is it Oklahoma that enforces it? And I think going forward, There are a lot of questions we're about to be having to answer.
Hmm.
But, I think it's important we give them an answer. Important we talk this stuff out. Main reason I wanted to do all this.
And that's the way that history kind of unfolds in a way. Like, that's it, because I have some. Wait, were
Oh,
you gonna say
you
something?
said history unfolds in a way, in that, you got to keep in mind a lot of these were originally confederacies. And I really think that idea could really help. Maybe
Hmm.
say Oklahoma was the the base name, like, you had Caddo, but then it branches off into everything else, so you had Oklahoma and then every other tribe related to it. Does that make sense? That
Hmm.
idea of a confederacy, I think, is something. And when you said that, that brought it up.
Yeah.
Because I really think if we're going to do anything about the future, man, you got to learn about the past.
Exactly. Got to be able to address the past to be able to move into the future.
Exactly.
There are so many subjects that I can connect to that, but we're just gonna keep our focus here right now.
Tons. We could be here
All
forever.
right. Do you see the native cultures of Oklahoma? Do you see them uplifting Oklahoma's own culture?
Oh, yeah, man. They've already uplifted it, I would say. No, our flag is mostly Native American. There's olive branches. That's European,
That is
but
valid.
it's, yeah, I'd say it's uplifted it culturally. It's, if we give them the chance to grow, they could uplift this financially. Because you got to keep in mind, that's a third of the state. So if you
Hmm.
uplift a third of the state, yeah, you're gonna uplift it financially. So
That is true.
in a lot of different ways, and culturally, the arts. I think they could provide a lot, since they, especially when it comes to arts, they have such a different perspective, and I think they could do a lot. Honestly,
Hmm. For sure. For sure.
definitely
Now,
financially.
all right. And now, through the times of tribes rising and then tribes being eliminated, and I know that we're living in this, it's 2024 right now, and the future can only, there's really no limit on what the future is. So with that brings up the question for me, do you think there's a possibility that some new tribes could be brought up?
Oh man, no, that's a good question. It's very interesting. A new tribe, you know, maybe not so much a new tribe, but a new clan. A new clan of a tribe. I think that's something that's very possible. Very possible, actually. Especially since, a lot of them are in such close proximity to each other. That has happened, but, forming a whole new tribe at this point could just be very difficult, since so much of the land here has just already been claimed by whether it's a native tribe or the federal, state, local government.
Hmm.
But a clan of a tribe, no, I think that's possible. That's interesting, though. That's something that could help going into the future.
For sure. For
That's a
sure.
good question. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Pencil.
Overall, I want to say, I feel like Native American culture is definitely, it's had a serious influence on our own culture. The way that you were speaking on it too, I could definitely agree with you on the whole subject. And I feel like the influence that tribes have had on this country and the state specifically, I feel like has also had an effect on how people carry themselves throughout the day. Like, I feel like the idea of a tribe is working in unity to reach a common goal and to be able to help each other thrive and to help each other work towards the goals that we're not even sure if we're reaching yet.
Yeah, it's that idea, how natives have had their democracy set up in the past, has actually influenced us to the second is, look at the United States, but the United States branches off into 50 different states, each one with their own culture, their own flag. They're getting to the point where they're starting to have their own dialects. I don't sound like someone from New York. See how I just sounded? I can't do that. That's not how I talk, man. See, my point being is, like you had Caddos and they branched off into different things. You have the U.S. and that branches off into 50 states, and then these 50 states all have their own different tribes and reservations. So that idea of the tribe, that native idea of the tribe, is just woven into everything we do. And I'm glad you brought that up, is because our Constitution is actually based off the Sequoian Constitution. Oklahoma's Constitution is based off of that. So there's this native culture woven into just about everything.
Yeah.
And honestly, and then of course you got to think to yourself, they were the first ones here. So yeah, it's to be expected that they would inspire so much.
Overall.
And inspire so much, and be the target of so many.
Either way, I feel like by the end of the day, their culture should be recognized, and it should continue to be recognized. And there should definitely be some more attention brought to it, because I feel like we don't have enough knowledge on what America or what Oklahoma was like before the Spanish showed up. Before Columbus decided, hey, I'm gonna show up to the wrong spot.
Right. And I would say some things don't really go into as much detail as they should. They'll just kind of brush over those time periods and act like there wasn't too much going on. Like I said, man, you can make whole HBO movies outside of some of those stories. They'll tell you, man, of warfare and how they just lived and whatever games they may played and political strife, all that, like there's so much you could talk about, and I think, history could give more details. Like, they're brought up. I'm glad they're being brought up, but we need more details.
Definitely. All right, so that's gonna wrap up this episode of the Pioneer Podcast. Do you have an outgoing message for the people that are watching right now?
And I would just tell everyone, we may live in some interesting times, but keep your head up. It's not the first. Anytime I think of that, I always tell myself, not the first time we lived through hard times, so you'll be okay.
That is so valid, man. Oh my. All right. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Kai. Thank you again, Michael, for coming through. Appreciate you. All right. Y'all take care. Have a good one. And we'll catch you later. Peace out.